Hangman Adam Page has returned to AEW, and while many people believe that this version of Hangman Page is supposed to be that all-elusive heel run that we've been asking for a while, the fact of the matter is, this version of Hangman Page isn't a heel, at least not in the traditional sense. Normally, when we talk about heel characters in pro wrestling, while they may have their own motivations, very seldom are their motivations justifiable to the point where you could argue that they are the good guy. And in Hangman's world, in Hangman's headspace, in the storyline that they have told over the past year or so with Hangman Page, it is very clear that Hangman Page not only feels justified in his anger towards Swerve Strickland, but also is justified in that anger. And in this video, we're going to take a look back at all of the events leading up to this quote-unquote heel turn and why Hangman Page is justified in his own story. Before we get into that though, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. All of this starts back in September of 2023. In the fallout of All Out, Hangman Page and Swerve Strickland came face to face in what was at the time a very traditional promo for both. Swerve was in the midst of a heel run that many people believed would jumpstart his rise into the main event scene, but none of us could have seen going the way it did, because it would eventually turn Swerve into the biggest, most undeniable name in that world title picture. But at the time, Hangman Page was the face, and it was clear. And throughout that first promo, they kind of planted the seeds for where this story would go. Originally, the story was one of Hangman Page actually sympathizing with Swerve, sympathizing with his desire to make history and become the first ever Black AEW World Champion, sympathizing with all of the criticism and the unjustifiable criticism that was levied Swerve Strickland's way in his time in All Elite Wrestling. But at the same time, Hangman understood that Swerve Strickland was in his way of redeeming himself, redeeming his story, and making his way back into the world title picture. And that's what kickstarted this feud. And after Hangman Page lost his match against Swerve Strickland at AEW Wrestle Dream, this took it up a notch, because this is when the animosity between the two grew and when this feud grew to be personal. They were very far away from taking shots at each other that any traditional wrestling feud would do. They were taking more personal shots at each other, with Swerve Strickland even calling out Hangman Page's family. And one thing we know for sure is that Swerve Strickland isn't exactly shy of going after people's families in feuds. But as things grew more personal, so did the actions of Swerve Strickland. Swerve Strickland at one point broke into Hangman Page's house when he knew Page wasn't in town. And he went to his son's crib, leaving a Swerve Strickland shirt where his son sleeps, as if to leave his mark and say, "You were not a man because you did not defend your family. You did not defend your loved ones. It was that easy for me to come into your house and do whatever I wanted to do, and you're just lucky that I wasn't in the wrong mood." And from that moment on, things became even more personal between the two. Hangman Page was done with the pomp and circumstance of even an entrance. When they had their Texas Death Match at Full Gear 2023, Hangman Page went right to the ring and started beating down Swerve Strickland. It got to a point where in that match, he started to drink Swerve Strickland's blood, showing just how much Hangman Page despised Swerve Strickland, that he was willing to do one of the most gross and intimate acts that one could do. But that's where Swerve Strickland took the Hangman Page character, because he wanted to prove to Swerve that if you mess with my family, you're not getting a sane man, you are getting vengeance, you are getting Hangman's justice, you are getting Hangman Page going to a deep, dark place that he didn't even know that he had in order to brutalize, victimize, and decimate his enemy, and that enemy is Swerve Strickland and everything that he stands for. Remember, it was Swerve who was the one who made it personal between the two. And when Swerve Strickland did the unthinkable, not only beating Hangman in a Texas death match, which meant that he now has 2 wins over Page, but then doing it in such a almost poetic fashion by hanging him in that match at Full Gear. And by doing this, Swerve didn't only win the match, but he also emasculated Hangman Adam Page, because he said that even when I motivate you, even when I make it as personal as he did, it doesn't matter, because you still couldn't defend yourself. You still couldn't win the fight. And at the end of the day, you still wouldn't be able to defend your family. And that is when we saw this character of Hangman Page take another turn. That is when we saw this transformation, this physical transformation of Hangman Page, where the mustache became more prominent. But the reality is, we got Hangman Page who was done taking things lightly. In the past, Hangman Page has been all about business. He's been all about conducting himself in a manner that befits a good guy, in a manner that befits the way he came up in AEW. But now, after going through what he has with Swerve Strickland, Hangman is not worried about conducting himself in a business matter. He's not worried about coming across as a likable guy. When Swerve Strickland made it personal and then was able to effectively rub it in Hangman's face and get away with it, this drove Hangman to a point where he doesn't care what anyone else thinks, because in his mind, he believes that Swerve Strickland, the adulation that he began to get at the latter part of 2023, and all of which that catapulted him to the world title picture going into Revolution, all of that was unjustified and undignified, because in his eyes, Swerve isn't a decent man. And if Swerve isn't a decent man, then Hangman says, I don't need to be either. And that's why at Revolution, the story going into it was that Hangman does not want to win the title. He is beyond thinking about titles. He is beyond thinking about accomplishments or achievements. Hangman Page's sole focus is to ensure that Swerve Strickland doesn't get an ounce of happiness as long as he's there in All Elite Wrestling. He wants to ensure that Swerve Strickland stays as far away from the AEW World Championship picture as possible. He wants to ensure that no matter what, Swerve Strickland pays for what he did to Hangman Page, what he did to Hangman's family, and the humiliation that he caused him. And that is why at Revolution we saw Hangman go to the lengths that he did. That's why he attacked the referee. And that's why when he saw Swerve Strickland was going to be able to break up the coquina clutch that Samoa Joe had locked in on Hangman Page, instead of letting him do so and continuing the match, and even letting Swerve have a shot at potentially winning that match, with a smile on his face, he tapped out, because he knew that on that night, in the circumstances that Hangman controlled, Swerve would not walk out as world champion. And to Hangman, that is enough. And when we talk about the Hangman's justice, when we talk about Adam Page and his motivation for coming back to All Elite Wrestling, he did not enter the Owen Hart Cup in order to win a title. He did not return to align himself with the elite. Hangman Page returned to deliver vengeance and justice to Swerve Strickland. And in many ways, when you go back and look at everything that's transpired over the past year, Hangman Page's justice is defensible, and it's even reasonable. And that is the beauty of this story, because we have a heel with terrific motivations and a babyface who has a history with this heel, who also at this point has become one of the most beloved characters in all of All Elite Wrestling and the face of the company. So the potential for storytelling here going forward is amazing. And that's why I truly believe that this version of Hangman Page might be one of the best characters in all of professional wrestling.